Your existence is already enough. To my delight, several groups of Buddhists from New Zealand and Australia invited me to come and give a Dharma talk. So for the first time in my life, I got to cross the equator and flew to Auckland and Sydney. Even though it was a long way from Seoul, I was looking forward to this trip because it would also give me a chance to visit my closest graduate school friend who'd studied with me in the United States. He'd moved back to Australia after receiving his PhD and had become a professor. It had been over a decade since I'd promised to visit him. Each time I saw his Christmas card, which arrived without fail as each year drew to a close, I would recall the promise that I'd so far failed to keep. Now that the opportunity had come about, I was really looking forward to seeing him again. On the other side of the equator, the weather was the opposite of what it had been in Korea. The temperature on the day of my talk was over 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And I learned that in the southern hemisphere, if you want a house that gets a lot of sun, you have to choose one that faces north. Also, rivers tend to flow north rather than south, and in the night sky, the Southern Cross takes the Big Dipper's place. Though they were literally the polar opposite of the place where I had been living, New Zealand and Australia didn't seem as foreign as I might have expected, especially their people. Well aware of the lonely and busy lives in modern cities, I was honored to be able to offer them some words of comfort and wisdom. When the various talks were over, I headed to my friend's house. I rang the bell, and he opened the door and greeted me with a big smile on his face. We reached to clasp each other's hand and embraced, like family members long separated by the Korean War. Though 10 years had gone by, he looked very much the same, aside from his hair having thinned slightly and his body having filled out a bit. He was as outgoing and warm-hearted as ever, and as I also knew his wife, Jane, from our grad school days, I felt at ease in their company. After dinner, we drank tea on the terrace as the sun went down and laughed out loud at how we were already middle-aged. Our hearts were still those of students. We could not believe we had become men over 40. As old friends, we were unguarded and revealed our inner feelings freely. Old friends have no need to display artificial selves. You can accept them as they are and share your true self with them. He was such a friend for me. He told me everything that had happened over the past decade, talking until he reached his recent worries. I remember that he had always been anxious, even with nothing in particular to be anxious about. He told me that his anxiety had gotten worse recently, and to stave it off, he had been working hard. Jane was concerned that his health would suffer if it continued this way. He worked every night at his computer, even after midnight. He rarely got a good night's sleep, and he was always busy. Of course, his hard work had earned him recognition in the academic world and a swift promotion at his university. But not only could he not stop working, he also was overcome with anxiety when he had no work to do. Night had fallen, and it was chilly outside. We went inside to avoid the mosquitoes and sat on the sofa. My friend put on some quiet music and poured himself a glass of wine. He told me that he'd had a tough childhood. In the eyes of the world, his father had achieved success, but he took out his work stress on his family. His father would transform into a different person and become violent when he had been drinking. He even beat my friend. So my friend felt like he was walking on thin ice at home. When his father was in that state, his mother would leave the house to avoid him. And in her absence, my friend had to look after his younger siblings, pretending for their sake that it was all a game. That was when he became increasingly nervous, never knowing when his father might drink and explode. Reflecting on how it happened for my friend when he was young, I made a guess as to where his anxiety and workaholism came from. Wanting to help him however I could, I spoke carefully. Because each person's situation is different, it's difficult to draw any firm conclusions. But one of the known causes of becoming a workaholic is growing up feeling unworthy of your parents' attention unless you do something great, as opposed to feeling loved and cared for unconditionally. This also tends to be the case with children of successful parents who are too busy with their lives and show little interest in children's lives. To win their parents' attention, such children feel under constant pressure to do things to please their parents. Otherwise, they feel unlovable and their actions are devoid of meaning. In your case, it makes sense that you have developed this constant feeling of anxiety, given your father's violence when drinking. It must have been very difficult for you with your mother not there to protect you. Never knowing when your father might explode, you probably thought that the only way to prevent it would be to do everything he wanted you to, and to do it correctly. Now, as an adult, your father is gone. However, it's the world's demands rather than your father's that are making you feel anxious. That if you don't do everything that's asked of you, and do it correctly, your existence has no meaning or worth. My friend nodded, seeming to agree with what I'd said. But the truth is, you're already worthy of being loved. You don't need to be convinced of your self-worth by taking on society's demands and living up to its expectations. You already are a precious being and deserve to be loved and cared for. Look inside and see if you can find the child within you, still shaking with anxiety because of his father. Send the energy of loving kindness to that inner child, and look at him compassionately. How difficult it must have been coping with your father's rage alone, trying to protect your siblings without even your mother to help you. At this point, both my friend and I were in tears. My friend closed his eyes for a while, then said calmly, "You're right. There's still a little kid inside me, trembling with anxiety, unable to be loved. And he's pleading with me not to ignore him anymore. All this time I made myself too busy worrying about the opinions of others, while suppressing the inner wound from the past. I need to believe that I am worthy of love for who I am." As I was leaving his home a few days later, I left a brief note for my friend. When we were in graduate school, you were like a big brother to me. You helped me overcome several crises. You don't know how grateful I am even now when I think of your kind heart. And so, for goodness sake, please remember, even if you never achieve anything big and significant, to me, your existence alone is already enough. Bedtime reading for you.